Welcome to the Level Up Lifestyle, where we tell the real stories of people who overcame and elevated. In today's episode, Mike sits down with agency owner Drew Aderholt. Drew takes us along his journey of becoming a true leader, from the wisdom that shaped Drew's life before he was even born.
Find a career where you're not working out in the cold and the rain when you're 70 years old like I am.
To the burden of leadership that he wasn't ready for.
I felt like I was losing sleep at night of like, well, how am I going to show this guy he's going to see me fail?
To the perspective that catapulted him beyond his family legacy.
You'll always overestimate what you can do in the short term and underestimate what you can accomplish in the long term.
All of this coming up next on the Level Up Lifestyle.
Of course. All right, well, welcome to the Level Up Lifestyle podcast. I am your host, Mike Sheets. We are coming to you live from McKinney, Texas, and today we have a very special guest, but we have a very special audience as well. We are here at day 3 of a Leadership Academy 101. So excited. We got over 100 people here in the room, almost 150 people here in this room. Some of our newest supervising agents, some general agents, people getting into leadership. And we've been spending the last 3 days really just pouring into them on leadership development, helping them, equip them with tools so they can go back, be better leaders, and achieve their goals and help others achieve success as well. So excited to have them here. That we did take them to a Rangers game the last night. So if you notice, yeah, there you go. It was the longest Rangers game of the year, so they may be a little bit more subdued. I was impressed with the energy here to start things out. So, but so excited to have them here, and so excited to have you here, Drew.
I appreciate that.
So, tell us about yourself. We're going to get into your story and your family story, and it's really amazing just how everything weaves together. But I think just to start, for those that are watching or those that are listening that don't know you, you're an agency owner,
Right.
Okay, and you're based out of where?
Alpharetta, Georgia, so just north of Atlanta.
Okay. Atlanta Metro, though.
Yeah.
Okay. And how long have you been an agency owner?
3 years in January.
3 years in January. And you've been with the company for how long?
12.
For 12 years in total.
Yeah.
Okay. What's interesting about your story is you've really been with the company since you were born.
Yeah.
Because of your father.
You know, I'm one of the few people that can claim that I chose insurance versus the other way around.
Yeah. Everybody else was like, I did not want insurance.
Right.
And here we are.
It found me.
It found me, yeah. And I'm glad it did. And it found you through your family. So I want to talk about that because there's a lot of really good little nuggets to pull out and some lessons along the way that I think are important for the listeners. So let's just go a generation before you. Let's talk about your dad, Tim.
Sure.
So tell me about him.
So he joined Liberty National back in the early 80s.
Okay.
At the time, my mother and him had not been married too long. They were renting a house from a lady that had actually gone to work for Liberty National. He was a service manager at a Pontiac dealership in Mobile, Alabama, and was working 6 days a week at the time, I'm sure, long hours. And it was one particular Saturday, he was there in the service lane. One of the car salesmen I think he was in his early 70s, and it was kind of a rainy winter day. And a young couple had pulled on the lot to look at a car. He ran out there in the rain to greet them. They say only the hungry car salesmen go out when it's raining.
Yeah.
Came back in, he was soaking wet, and Dad asked him what happened. And he said, well, the young couple just got married. They don't have any money yet. They want to buy a car, but they, not going to be able to do it anytime soon. So they were just looking. And he said, it's got to be frustrating to go out there in the cold and the rain and talk to somebody that, may never end up purchasing or maybe some time off. And he said, why don't you just retire? And he said, well, Tim, I can't retire. He said, we don't have any retirement here. And he said, son, let me give you some advice. Find a career that has a great retirement program to where you're not working out in the cold and the rain when you're 70 years old like I am.
Wow.
And so I really think that got him thinking. And the lady that they were renting the house from was, I believe, maybe in her second year at Liberty National. And she'd been a stay-at-home mom prior to that. And kids had gotten older and I don't think needed her quite as much. So she decided, I guess she was bored, just wanted to go back to work. And in a conversation that they had, Dad found out that she made more money her first year at Liberty National than he was making at the Pontiac dealership as a service manager. And I think hurt his pride a little bit. And so she offered to invite him in for a job interview. They were had an open agency at that time. They were
back then it's different. Yeah, back then
100%.
It's an employee. It's got to be a fit. There has to be an opening.
Right.
It's not come on in and we got an opportunity for you.
Yeah. But I think he was reluctant at first, but he finally took that interview, and everybody told him he was crazy, leaving a service manager job, something that was stable, to go to commission. But when he heard about the retirement program and these things called renewals, I think he felt like it was the right place to be.
So what do you think, besides just that conversation with the salesman at the dealership, was there anything else motivating your dad to make that change? Because like you said, it is a stable position.
Right.
And maybe, I don't know, maybe back then a service manager is a little different than the actual car sales. I know there's a lot of, that you hear the dealerships make most of their money through the service department, so there's probably some commission behind there too.
I think it was a stable job, but it certainly wasn't providing the lifestyle that he was wanting.
Yeah.
And I think the motivating factor for him was how he grew up. He was had 5 younger sisters, so he was the oldest and only boy. Spent most of his childhood in a single wide mobile home. So if you do that math, that his bedroom was the couch.
His bathroom was probably outside.
Yeah, I think he said he had to book an appointment for a couple weeks out to be able to get in. And he told me that as a child he got really good at riding that school bus home and figuring out if there was going to be power in the mobile home, because I think back in those days they pulled the meter out or put a tag. I don't know. He could spot it from a long way off. And so just grew up with a lot of instability, and I think was really desperate to find something that would provide a better lifestyle for him and his future family.
So what does his parents do then through this period of time? What was he witnessing?
Well, his parents were divorced at an early age. And so when they were living in Mobile, his dad was still in Atlanta, so they didn't see each other a whole lot. My grandmother worked at a convenience store as a cashier for about as far back as I can remember. She may have held other jobs. There were several stepfathers in and out of his life, so just once again, just not a lot of consistency.
Yeah, instability.
Yeah,
trying to find his way, and I'd imagine he probably almost had to maybe be a father figure to his sisters in a way, right?
Oh, 100%.
Young girls.
He was the only male that was there on a consistent basis.
Yeah.
I think he ended up in the service department because he had to work on the vehicles to keep them running.
Yeah.
So he's pretty handy.
He already knew.
Yeah, 100%.
Already knew what to do. So he's wanting to not live that life.
Right.
Obviously. So he makes the decision to come to Liberty National, start in Alabama, right? And then what was that career progression? And where do you come into this world and in this career track for him?
Yeah, so I would say that my earliest memory, he was with the company probably maybe 6 or 7 years the time I was born. And one of my earlier memories was he was promoted at the time. He was the youngest branch manager, they called him back in those days.
He's an agency owner.
Yeah. 1992, we moved to the metropolis of Fitzgerald, Georgia. And so I would have been about 3 years old at that time and still have few memories. Spent a couple years there. He ended up back in, Alabama was that's where everybody wanted to be. Right. Yeah. So
used to be headquartered in Birmingham, Alabama.
Ended up back in Mobile. Thank goodness we got out of there. I might be working for those Mitchell boys. But he ended up in home office, which at the time was based in Birmingham, and was what they called a regional vice president. Did a lot of traveling. And so at that time I was in kindergarten, and most of what I remember was a lot of maybe Sunday evenings, Monday mornings, he was headed out to his region, coming back in late on a Friday. Mm-hmm. So our time together was on a Saturday. We were fortunate that my mother didn't have to work. But I don't think he was happy with that. I certainly wasn't. And so I remember having a family dinner at a local restaurant there in Birmingham about an opportunity that was going to become available in North Georgia. We didn't know where Gainesville was, but the agency owner there was going to retire. And Dad had an opportunity to take over that agency. And all I heard was it meant that he was going to not have to travel anymore. So I was a big fan of making that move. So around first grade, we moved to Gainesville, and that's where we've been ever since.
So is there anything that you took out of just that period? I know you were in kindergarten, but these little lessons you learn, especially when you're young, kind of stay with you, right? So was there anything that you maybe pull out of today from just seeing that work ethic, knowing that he was getting in his car on Monday, you weren't seeing him till Friday, he's traveling all around, he's putting in all this hard work. I don't know if you knew at that point what his past was like, but did the dots ever connect to say, hey, he's working hard to get out of the life that he had and provide a life for you?
Sure. Yeah, I don't think at the time I was making that connection, but I certainly had a role model of what hard work and sacrifice looked like. I mean, he didn't want to get in the car and leave on Monday and be gone all week. But at the time, that was, that was where he felt was best in order to get his career to the next level and the things that he wanted to provide for his family. And so certainly looking back today, I recognize the hard work. And
it's a lesson in the sacrifice that it takes to get to where you want to go, right?
100%.
And I think a lot of people can relate to that. I can relate to that. The time that you have to spend away, especially early on in the beginning of building the foundation, building the career. And in a way, the time that your dad spent away from you as a young child was hard for him, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Right? But don't you feel that probably gave him the opportunity to then be the agency owner in Gainesville? And if he hadn't made that commitment, he probably wouldn't have had that opportunity presented.
Yeah, it absolutely did. Had he not been in that position, that it probably had a little insider information. That retirement news probably got to him a little quicker than it did anybody else. Because then at that point, there was, it kind of became a bidding war of who wanted it. So certainly having access to that information quicker allowed him to probably get his name in the hat. Everything happens for a reason.
Sure.
And so it was a short-term sacrifice. It was a couple years. So,
but I think it's important for people just in those moments in their life to realize that I think this short-term period, sometimes we think of this as a forever.
Right.
And you don't think about what going through this short-term period can do for you long-term.
That's right. Yeah. I oftentimes say is in my first week of training that I'm involved with in the agency that, sometimes this career can be a lot like raising toddlers. And I'm in the thick of that right now where they say that the days can be long and the years are short.
Sure.
And it's amazing how fast 12 years goes by. And we've all made those sacrifices. And in the moment, they seem like it was a really long period of time. But in hindsight, it wasn't.
Yeah, I've been with this company for 18 years now, which doesn't make any sense because I graduated from college 4 years ago.
Right, yeah.
I don't know how that's possible.
That's right.
But as the time flies and the days are long. So growing up in the company then, when did you start, or did you notice or start to notice that, okay, your life's maybe a little different than the vast majority? Maybe you've got some friends and your opportunities are different, or your trips. I mean, did you ever notice any difference, or was it just this is life growing up? Or
yeah, I think I certainly recognized that we had a great lifestyle. I think one of the moments where I really started to connect the dots was 2008. I graduated high school that year, and I remember a lot of my buddies having plans they were going out of state to school, and obviously with the economy at that time, they had parents laid off, lost their jobs, and I saw a lot of plans change. And I remember seeing my father's career in the agency continue to flourish. And, I remember having a conversation with him about the impacts of recessions and how our industry is maybe somewhat immune to some of those factors. And so that was a moment that I remember. I'd always said, well, I kind of wanted to follow in his footsteps, but I started to realize the stability that was in our industry in this career.
People remember like 2020, like that was a crazy year.
Yeah.
And that's we can get to that here in a little bit about being an owner through that. But 2020 was challenging. There were certainly some other things, but 2008, everything from a financial perspective just got flipped on end, and you kind of forget about that. But that was a very difficult time in the country. Mass layoffs, lots of challenges. So you're seeing,
and the company had the best year they'd ever had.
Absolutely,
yeah.
I remember I'd been with the company for 2 years, and just didn't even really
Yeah.
things seem to be doing okay here.
You know, in fact, I remember this success that the agency was having to the point where I lobbied really hard to convince my father I didn't need to go to college.
Yeah.
I knew several people in the agency that didn't have college degrees, and I didn't want to go to school. I wanted to start work. Luckily, he was much wiser than I was and knew that 18 years old probably wasn't the best. That wasn't the best fit. So.
When did the success that your father had been experiencing, was there a time where you're like, okay, so you're living a different lifestyle, right? I mean, As a kid growing up, were you able to, was that just experience, more trips, different lifestyles, not having to want for things? And
yeah, I always say that I had everything I needed and I had a lot of what I wanted. But I was fortunate that I think because of my father's humble beginnings, I didn't have a silver spoon in my mouth. I started working when I was probably maybe 12, 13.
Wow.
My bus driver had a side business at his house where he bought and sold a bunch of goods. And so I'd ride the bus home with him in the evenings and work with him at his house. And it was only a couple miles down the road. Mom and Dad would come pick me up that evening. I'd cut grass for myself every summer throughout the neighborhood. And so, I was fortunate to have things like motorcycles and dirt bikes, but I had things I wanted to do to those, and they're expensive. And I had to be able to provide those things. I drove a truck at the time that I think got about 12 miles to the gallon, and my $20 gas allowance that I think I lost in my first week driving because I did something stupid. So
gas prices changed in 2000.
Yeah, I had to fund those things, and I was. I was not the most athletic, and so I realized that I could play, but I wasn't going to get a lot of playing time. So through school, I focused on work and worked through college. But there were certainly moments where my last year of college, I got to study abroad, spent 5 weeks in Spain.
Oh, wow.
And, just opportunities that, not only to go to college, my father certainly didn't have that opportunity, but then to study abroad. And there was never a question about what we had to sacrifice in order to make that happen. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just an interesting perspective because, you're almost looking at the generational impact in a way of what this opportunity can do. Your dad's motivation growing up in trailer, powers off, powers on.
Yeah.
Challenging upbringing, not wanting to be a part of that. That moment talking to the salesman, really not only changed his life, it changed your life.
Sure.
It's going to change your kid's life.
Yeah.
Right.
When you think about the power of I've always heard, there's just that one generation that tends to make that shift. And what a different trajectory the family is on because of that decision.
Yeah, absolutely. So when do you start getting into the business? Did you know this is what you wanted to do? I know you said you didn't want to go to college, so just get right in.
Yeah.
Or was there a time where I'm going to see my way through this? Or when did you start?
Yeah, like I said, I think it was always plan A, and I don't know that I ever really thought much past that. I was fortunate to be able to see what this career could provide, but just like anybody else that comes into our business, I didn't know what Dad did when he went to work every day.
Yeah.
But I was fortunate to see the back end result. So I was willing to do just about anything that I needed to do in order to get that. And so I knew that it was always the thing that I wanted to try. And I don't even like using that word, but that was really my mindset of I'm going to go here and I'm going to give this my best shot. But I've got, I had no way of knowing if this is where I was going to be happy or if I'd be good at it. And so I joined the company in August of 2012. Because of that study abroad deal, it kind of messed my schedule up a little bit. And so I was on the 4.5-year program. But that last semester I had, 6 or 9 credit hours. And so Craig and I convinced Dad to let me come to work before I had graduated, which was a big sticking point for him. And so I skipped I didn't have much class to go to, and then I skipped what little bit I did have. And so I remember, my first check was more than I'd always done landscaping and that type of thing. And my first check in Liberty when I was still in school was more than I had ever made cutting grass or weed eating or anything like that. And so I bought in pretty quick. Yeah.
So what was that experience like getting into the business? Because you think, okay, well, obviously your childhood, it was important from your dad's perspective to have you work
Yeah.
and to earn what it is that you have as a kid, obviously still providing for you and giving you a lifestyle to live. But when you transitioned into the agency, here comes the boss's kid.
Right.
What was that like?
I think he and I both were very conscious of the perception of that. And I worked really hard to make sure that there was never a possible accusation. And I was fortunate to, Craig was my agency director at the time, and he was my trainer, and he was very successful. And so, Dad was pretty hands off with the training. We were pretty distant in the office, but because I didn't, just like anybody else, I didn't know anything about insurance, but I was in a position where at 22 years old with no kids and not married, and I could afford to just work all the time. And so I figured out that if I just outworked most people, then it really didn't matter what my last name was. There was nobody that could point the finger that could say that my life had been easier. And in fact, I think most people, there was maybe some of that perception within possibly the company, but if you were in our agency, you knew life was probably harder for me than it was anybody.
You're the coach's son,
yeah,
in a way?
Exactly.
Did you get any, so your dad's involvement, no extra training, he's not say, hey, go to this account. Why don't you go do,
right. In fact, I think if anything, because Craig was successful, at the time we were, heavily worksite, he had a ton of re-enrollments, and I was pretty good at that part. And I think Craig appreciated the fact that he could tell me to do something, and I did it to the best of my ability, and he could depend on me. And I'm not so sure that my father didn't realize that maybe because while I was earning it, I certainly had some opportunities because of Craig. And so I'd been with the company about 8 months when he decided one day I was going to become an agency director. There was no supervising agent, general.
You just move up,
agent to agency director. And at the time that was totally at the agency owner's discretion. I don't know that we had all the requirements and the clear-cut track that we do today.
Yeah.
And so, I begged and pleaded for him not to do that because I felt like I didn't have a clue what I was doing. And he said no. And looking back, I realized that I think he wanted to make life a little harder for me. And it certainly was that first year. As an agency director, you make about half what the agent does, but yet I had no team. So if you do that math, I was working really hard and making about half of probably what I could have been as an agent, and trying to train and develop people, and with no experience in that. So it was, those first 2 years as an agency director were hard. But I think because of my age and lacking some of the connections, I was struggling in closing cases in the worksite market. And around that time was when you brought us the individual presentation, and I attended a training in Birmingham and realized that this was an opportunity that maybe I could essentially, once again, I could try this model. Yeah. And I had some success those first couple of weeks, and I think saw it as an opportunity where I could kind of blaze my own trail. Dad he was certainly a trailblazer in the worksite industry and in the direction that the company went in that market. And I think I was looking for something to be able to kind of step out on my own.
Yeah. So I want to go back a little bit though, and really unpack this journey. So when you first started in the agency, did you know how, because your dad's agency was very successful. He was one of really the pioneers of the company. He was a leader. Did you know that? Did you know what you were walking into?
Yeah, I certainly did.
How did you know that? Was that just from interactions? Or?
Well, one of the moments it was my senior year of college. He called, and that year convention was in Vegas. It was at Caesar's Palace, and he called me and said, "Look, we're the top agency in the company. We've got the top agency director, and I think maybe 7 of the top 10 agents in the company that year. So it was certainly the Aderholt agency show at the award." And he said, I don't know if we'll ever do this again or how long this will last, and I'd like for you to be in attendance if you can make it. And so,
was that a hard decision as a senior in college to go to Vegas?
Thought about it for about 2 seconds. Yeah.
What's the weather going to be like there?
Sure. I weighed it all out. But attending that and seeing seeing that success. I mean, I knew the legacy that he had created, and there was certainly the weight of that was heavy, you know, at times.
Yeah.
So
did that help solidify even more that this is the path you want to go down?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that helped me was, you know, I think everybody in their career has those moments where you think, should I go do something else, or should I go back to what was comfortable or safe? And that was never really an option for me, because I couldn't fathom walking in his office and telling him that I couldn't do this anymore, or I quit, or I give up. And I knew by seeing, you know, I'm competitive, I'm realistic as well. And I'm like, you know, I may not be as good as some of those people, but I can be pretty dang close. And so I knew that if I just stuck to the systems and the processes, that I could be successful. I could be what they were, what I was witnessing that year at convention.
Yeah. So when you first started, then it's not a lot of special treatment, coach's son, right?
Right.
A lot of pressure. Did you feel pressure knowing that you are Drew Aderholt, your name's on the building, your name's on the agency, you know the success that this office has? Was there extra weight and pressure on you from there, or did you embrace it, or how did you handle that?
I think I certainly felt some extra pressure. You know, I wanted to make sure that when the reports ran at the end of the week, that I had there were respectable results next to my name. Mm-hmm. I think although it wasn't my agency, having that ownership mentality, once again, I didn't realize it at the time, but I think those things helped give me the success that I've had in this career. But yes, I mean, certainly knowing that, I mean, it wasn't pressure from him. I mean, there was never a moment, I mean, that the decision for me to join the company was all mine. There wasn't even any pressure in that regard. But the pressure I put on myself of wanting to continue what he had worked really hard to build, his career.
How important is having that ownership mindset into the success of anything you do? Because here, it's almost in a way, I don't say it was forced on you, but the decision to have that ownership mindset maybe have been a little bit more natural.
Sure.
Right? But looking back in hindsight, it would be no different than having the ownership of anybody else in something they do, because it's not your agency, it's your father's, right? And you're not anything more than a new agent with an opportunity. So going into anything, whether it's coming into this business or if it's going to, you know, any personal goals that somebody might have, how important is having that ownership mentality to that success?
I think it's extremely important, because if you really think about, if you have that true ownership mentality, then it means the buck stops with you. You're accountable. You're held accountable to all results, and whether that's as an agent or as an agency owner.
There's no excuses.
100%. Yeah.
You are
right.
The doer.
Yeah.
Right. So, what were your first experiences like getting out in the field? You were how old when you first started?
I was 22.
22. Okay.
So when the agency director promotion, I shouldn't even call it that, but came and the transition into the individual market, I was 23 at the time, and yeah, I mean, I hired my first agent. We went to the field that first. I had never written a bank draft app before, but luckily with the needs-based laptop presentation, it did the job, and we had some good weeks, but it was a completely different model from the worksite, which was a little more 8 to 5, and this was more, 5 to 9. I remember having several conversations with Brady, trying to convince her that no, people really do buy insurance. I'm in someone's house at 9 o'clock in the evening, and so there were a lot of, I think I worked every Saturday for probably 5 or 6 years, with just rare exception. And of course, late evenings, as you know well. And so, because I felt like I never had an opportunity to live the agent life, if you will, because when I first started with the company, I was living at home. So I wasn't going to run that typical individual market schedule where, your day got started later in the day. So I was always at the office early. And
how was that, living at home where the agency owner is your dad? And
yeah, life was easier if I could figure out a way to leave before him and come home like after he went to bed. And so he couldn't, he couldn't get on me too much at that point.
Yeah.
But once again, I kind of sort of got accustomed to working from like 9 to 9.
It's like a forced work ethic though. But I mean, when you're putting in that time in those hours in the beginning, you did it for a different reason.
Right.
But isn't that just a big, not because of your dad, but because you did it is a part of the success?
Yeah, and I had some pretty lofty goals. I wanted to make 6 figures my first year. I knew what was possible. I mean, I'd seen Corey make $400,000 in his first year. Once again, I was realistic. Maybe let's not go that far. But I knew that with no living expenses, I mean, I could really, if I just buckled down and to your point earlier, made sacrifices in those first couple years, I could certainly have, it would set us up for success. I mean, Brady and I were able to, buy a lot and build our first house together. And some of those, I always say when you start in this business young, you typically fall into one or two categories. If you're any good at this, you figure out that you can make some pretty decent money and you might not have to work all that hard to just fund maybe your weekend, your lifestyle, or you can recognize, the opportunity to buckle down and really set yourself up.
Build a life in the future.
Yeah.
So, all right, there's some other dynamics that are happening here, and I want to get into this and your decisions to do some of the things that you did. So your agency, when you come in and what your dad had built was at this point worksite. So what that meant is you're going in to businesses, typically when businesses are open. So like you said, kind of that 9 to 5 usually. When you're out in the field talking to business owners saying, hey, we're Liberty National. If you want to work with us, here's how that goes. And some say yes and most say no. And you close the account, you come back and you enroll the employees for insurance. So you're doing that kind of at the work, when it's work. And this agency is very well established, right? You're successful. They're winning awards. Yeah. You've got big top producers. Many of them are still here, still on stage.
Yeah.
So then, of course, Liberty National, we've talked about in other episodes, there was some leadership changes. There were some leadership challenges.
Yeah.
I think, in that early 2000s and, into the late, 2010, 11, the company changes. There's new processes that are coming out. And that's when you hear about the other market, which is the individual market. And the individual market, it's ironic because it's what started Liberty National, was going into people's homes.
Right.
And sitting down with them at their kitchen table and saying, hey, let's protect your family, cover final expense, your income, make sure the home, there's coverage there to pay off the house and send your kids to college, and kind of putting a program together that way. The laptop presentation was a new concept of, will kind of help tell that story for the agent and make it, I don't want to say easier, but it maybe simpler, easier to train, right? Yeah. And maybe more effective for the customer experience. Yeah. Right. Just definitely more professional.
Right.
Right.
And at the time, there wasn't a ton of systems in the worksite market. I mean, everybody kind of did it their own way. Yeah. And I would say that I was the perfect person to run that. And I was yearning for that, like, just show me how to train somebody, because that was the pressure I was feeling. Was okay, I know I have kind of sort of figured this thing out, but now how do I train somebody that's putting their livelihood in my hands? And what I saw with the individual market at the time was just kind of a soup to nuts, like, this is what this whole thing looks like. And I thought, let me just gravitate to that.
Yeah, yeah. So going into that, right, you're hired, you're trained, you're doing worksite. The agency director promotion happened while you were in worksite, or once this individual thing happened?
Almost like right in the middle of it. Yeah.
Okay. So there's an announcement, hey, we're going to have this training in Birmingham. We're going to teach everybody the individual market.
Yep.
Right. You guys are like, yes, let's just go lean right into this? Or was there a little bit of, I'm not sure, let's just go and see what it's about? Or had you made the decision yet to jump into this? Or
no, I don't think I even knew why we were going to Birmingham, to be honest.
Neither did I.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
And, certainly I can't remember what members of the management team at that time were there, probably all of them. And of course, I would say that most of them leaned against it. But as I was sitting there, I thought, okay, this is just, once again, it was a very systematic approach. And I thought, okay, if Mike's telling the truth and I just do what, I press this button and say this. And I thought, what do I have to lose? Because I'm struggling in this area. And I think at the time when we were in Birmingham, I'd hired that agent. He had not started yet. And once again, I felt like I was losing sleep at night of like, well, how am I going to show this guy he's going to see me fail? I've not perfected this closing cases thing.
So you weren't doing well as an agent before this. Let's get that point out. Or at least on the new account.
Correct. Not on the new accounts. And so what I knew was, and once again, I think why Dad may have said, I'm going to pluck you out from under Craig, because Craig could, once again, he was helping support me through those re-enrollments, and I was good at that part.
Yeah.
But I knew when I laid my head down every night, this is not sustainable, because you can't just survive off of the re-enrollments. And they were Craig's.
You go out and generate new business.
100%. They were Craig's accounts, not mine. And I knew that if I couldn't teach a new agent to close cases, then they were never going to be, self-sufficient.
So you're in transition here in your mind. Where am I going to go? How is this going to work?
This guy never should have come to work for me.
Yeah. So you see something and you decide, okay, I'm going to jump all into this. So what was that conversation like? Your dad brought you down and said, hey, I want to do it. Let's go. He gave you the free rein, or what? Talk about the transition into individual.
Yeah. I think he supported whatever decision that I wanted to make. As you mentioned, the company that's where our roots were. And so we had a lot of these customers that had not been serviced over the years because the focus was on the worksite market, these individual clients. And so I came back that next week and I said, this is what I'm going to try. And so I followed the schedule that you guys had outlined and had some...
Did it work? It worked?
Yeah. I wrote probably as much business that week as I had at a re-enrollment. And what I really liked about the market is that I could lean on the thing that I felt like I had always leaned on in the past, which was my work ethic. Yeah. I had total control. I lost a worksite account just due to a change in the human resources department, and had about $100,000 of premium on the books, one of the largest one I'd ever closed. And I hated that feeling of knowing I didn't do anything wrong. We did a great job paying claims, and we kept most of the business conservative. But I realized that I was putting all that fate in potentially that one person's decision, and I figured out pretty quick in the individual market, I can't lose 100 customers because one of them decided that they wanted to make a change. Yeah. And so I felt like I had control, and I could, if I needed to make more money, I could book some more appointments and run some more presentations, and it was more instant gratification. There wasn't the closed case and wait a couple months for the enrollment period to come up and that type of thing. Yeah.
I think the important lesson to take out of this too is just identifying where you are and being realistic with it, and then putting yourself in the best position to win.
Right. And listen, it didn't come without sacrifice, because everybody thought I was crazy why you want to be out there working at 9 o'clock at night? And so...
want to actually go to somebody's house?
Right.
Why would you do that?
Yeah.
So how'd you get through that?
It was tough in the Gainesville location, because every week you've got, once again, 7 of the top 10 agents in the company, and you're seeing all this success. And there's some things about the worksite market that you can't replicate in the same week in the individual market typically. And so it was hard to keep my team focused on what we were trying to accomplish. And around that time, one of our agency directors had a pretty long commute, and he had convinced Dad to open a second location that was about half the distance for him. And I remember attending, it was either my 101 or 201. Because of that promotion, I went to both like about a month apart. And we were at a Holiday Inn Express here in McKinney, and I talked to Steve on the sidewalk, and I remember him telling me, go to make the sacrifice. And, where I was going to drive past that Gainesville office and go another hour to this second location. And he said, but grow the agency in a market that you're basically non-existent in. And so I met with Jim, and he was a big fan of having some more help and support there. And so I went, and shortly thereafter, we convinced Dad to expand that office to a larger footprint and continue to grow it from there. And then ultimately at his retirement, the agencies were split, and that's how the whole thing happened.
That's where you are, yeah.
Correct.
So that original motivation, conversation with Steve, by the way, I wanted everybody here in the audience to hear that they used to have to stay at a Holiday Inn Express.
Yeah. Yeah, the Hyatt is
things
a little,
we've grown a little
right.
nicer now, right? Yeah, we're not at that. Which I think there was actually like a room that their air conditioning caught on fire one time during an academy at that Holiday Inn Express.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. It was times were different, right?
Yeah.
Back then. It's a lot nicer now. So what you had the conversation with Steve. Was there a motivation of I need to create my own identity? That's why I want to go out and do this, because this is a lot of work.
Yeah.
Right? You're doing something that everyone's telling you it's crazy. Why are you doing that? We've got all these accounts here that you can work in, you can grow. Worksite is proven. This is not proven. You're going to drive an hour out of your way. What's motivating you to do that?
I think two things. I'd like to say that it was just that I wanted to just totally blaze my own trail and make that name for myself. But the reality is I felt like there might be a little less pressure there. Because I think everybody, because of my father, being one of the pioneers of the worksite, I think everybody expected that that's where I would be, and there was a high level of expectation, whereas for the most part, nobody in the company really had any expectation for the individual market. And so it was twofold. I saw an opportunity to make a name for myself, but also to kind of get out of that worksite spotlight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you open up the individual market. Let's talk about the process and how that went.
Yeah. So I would say that was probably 2013, 2014 when we made that move, and just continue to grow that operation through the model that we had been trained on in that Birmingham training, all the way up to 2020 when things changed again.
What was that experience like for you in 2020? Because you're a big virtual office now. That's all you guys do, right?
It was scary, for a couple reasons. My son was born that January. And so, as best I can recall, it was about March when our customers started to not want to see us anymore.
Yeah.
And so, luckily the company made a quick transition by giving us some resources to be able to work virtually. But I mean, we had a whole agency that knew nothing about that. And so luckily we put our heads together and said, okay, we got to figure this out. And it was a lot of trial and error, as it pretty much was for anybody else.
Sure.
And what I saw during that time was an opportunity to be able to keep people in closer contact. We could provide a lot more resources to somebody when they were in the office all day, as opposed to maybe being out in a customer's home where we didn't really know what was happening or what help they needed. The not having to drive hours and hours a week. I felt like it was a little easier to maybe hire someone and convince them that maybe this was the right career for them. And so
it's a challenging time. You got a 2-month-old. You can't do business the way that you had been doing business that had created your success. And so, I mean, in this moment, really, instead of embracing the fear of, which I'm sure there probably was, or some, at least, I don't know what's going to happen.
Sure.
You found the benefits in it.
Yeah.
And look what it did for you.
Right. And I think we were fortunate to get just enough traction that at the time where some of the COVID stuff started to lift a little bit and people were being able to get back in person, I think we convinced the team that, like, hey, let's just keep running with what we're doing here. And for the most part, we could be the only person in that space. And of course, when you start thinking about the possibility of being able to do business nationwide from your one location, right. I mean, I certainly saw that if we could stay consistent and just keep focusing on that market, then what doors could it potentially open down the road?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you're doing this, and now you're in your own office, you're an hour away, you're doing your own market, so you got some separation. Right. Did you feel that same sense of ownership over this office? Like, this is your office?
Yeah, I would probably more so. I think that there were a lot of people, especially if you were relatively new, you probably assumed I was the agency owner.
Yeah.
Those that work in a satellite location probably know what I'm talking about, but the agency owner isn't there every day. So you're handling a lot of those responsibilities. In the moment, in hindsight now, I think I thought I was handling a lot of them. That wasn't entirely the case.
Finding some that now you're
100%
more as the agency owner.
And so, but yeah, I mean, I certainly I felt like it was mine.
Yeah. Well, and it's true. I tell agency owners that, listen, the satellite office is only a satellite office to you. To everybody else that works in that satellite office, that is their home office.
Right.
That is where that is their reality, and the culture of the company and everything is based out of there. So did you ever feel like, okay, I'm going to be an agency owner? Or, because again, it's already established of, Craig was very successful. Things were working out. On the work site, you got the individual going. When did the thought of being an agency owner, did you ever want to just let me go out and do it now? Or was it your dad's retirement? What was that like?
There were certainly some opportunities. I would say the general plan that I think he and I both had was that this would be a legacy operation. He would retire one day, I would take over. But there was never really discussion about when that would occur. I remember we were on a convention trip. I'd been with the company about 3 years. We were in San Diego. And
Hotel Del.
Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah. And there was a conversation had about expansion into California, which there were no agencies there at the time. And that was tempting. And I certainly wrestled with a couple of those decisions about, do I wait him out basically for retirement, or do we pack up and move? And ultimately we decided to stay where we were, but there was some uncertainty there because certainly he had a little bit of say-so in what happened with the agency, but I would say you and Steve had the majority. And so there was always a question mark of, am I the guy for the job? Right. And certainly we never really had those conversations until the point came where he decided to retire. And it was a relatively quick decision. It really resulted after a lunch with him and Steve one day.
We say that kind of tongue in cheek about who had the say so, but the reality of the matter is, and with all respect to you and your dad, that Steve's perspective, my perspective is we have to protect the company and the growth, and the agents that are there, making sure that they're taken care of, the leadership team that's there, make sure that they're taken care of, and of course the customers, and making sure that experience stays the same. So if it's going to, if he says, hey, this is who I want it to be, as long as that makes sense to us, then it makes sense to everybody.
But
that. It's not just it's going to be Drew regardless of who he is because of the last name, right? It doesn't get to be assigned. So you did have to earn this, right? You had to work towards it. I mean, it's an agency owner promotion the same as any other.
Well, I think most people think when they hear that agency owner term, they think, well, Tim owns this. He can just completely decide. And our model's a little different, right? Because
it's a captive agency.
Yeah, right. So I mean, I knew that I needed to be dancing when the spotlight hit me.
Yeah, absolutely. So did you feel like you were ready to be an agency owner when you were having those conversations about going to California? Where was your head at?
I would say at that time, no, I certainly didn't feel like I was ready. But I think just because of my father's career, I felt like I probably had a little more insight than the average person. So, I was convinced that I could do it. Yeah. And certainly felt much better prepared at the time of his retirement. I mean, looking back, once again, everything happens for a reason. Right. I think that would have been a big mistake on my part. There needed to be those growing up years.
Sure. Were there any lessons in that time frame that you say, hey, I'm really glad I went through that you use it later on as an agency?
There's just some things that I think only time can teach you, scenarios and problems and dealing with people. I mean, at 22, I didn't have insurance experience or life experience at that time.
You think you do?
100%. I look back and realize that how headstrong I was, because the reality is, what was I juggling? I wasn't married. I didn't have any children, and I was, everything revolved around the agency and results and production and those types of things. And I didn't tolerate much outside of that. Hence why I probably had a really difficult time keeping some people those first couple of years. Yeah. And so realizing that, the successful agencies are built off of those relationships, and you have those because you have a relationship with those people. And, you support them through their challenges and that type of thing. And I don't think I understood that at the time that maybe that conversation occurred about California.
Yeah. So that's good. So when you become the agency owner now, was it like, oh, this is just, okay, I'm just doing the same thing, and now it's my name on the wall? Or was there okay, this is different, this is, what was the transition like for you?
I certainly think I thought that it was going to be that way, but it wasn't. The last 2 years, I should say my first 2 years as agency owner were the most challenging of my career. I was listening to Tony's interview on the podcast, and I think he said it best, where he said, I was a good salesperson and I was a good sales manager, but running the business is a completely different side of things when you're responsible for payroll and all the bills and everything that occurs within that agency. Those were the things that I think I thought I knew, but I didn't. And that's a completely different level of management, or a different side of it.
Yeah.
And once again, looking back now, I think Dad tried to let me learn some lessons the hard way, because I think I'm like, why didn't you tell me this? But those lessons they're the best kind.
Yeah.
And I think that there was looking back, I wouldn't trade those first 2 years, because some of those struggles that I had, I think will aid me down the road.
Yeah. Well, isn't it a thing though sometimes where, okay, I don't want to take this opportunity because I don't know if I'm ready yet, or I don't know if I know everything I need to know. How much of the things that you learned as an agency owner, you were only going to learn when you're an agency owner? You can't get ready.
All of them, for the most part. Now, once again, I mean, I shouldn't have been an agency owner at 23 years old.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah.
That's where we may say, hey, I don't think that's...
Correct.
Let's work our way up here.
But all the struggles that I talk about in those first 2 years, you had to live them. And,
what were some of the things that you went through?
Mainly just managing all the finances. In my first year, we had in addition to the finances, we had one of our supervising agents drowned at one of my agency director's homes over 4th of July weekend.
Franz.
Franz, yeah. Franz had been with us over a year, was a great guy.
Real dynamic.
100%.
Life of the party, everybody loved him. Yeah.
But, no telling where he would be today if he was with the company. Had an 8-year-old son and a 18-month-old daughter at the time. And so you're dealing with that loss of a team member that was really vital in the agency at that time, and the emotional trauma of the agency director, that it occurred at their house. And there were several other members of his team that were there. He was having his son's birthday is July 5th. So that's kind of tainted now. But, and then, one of our agency directors was, let go for some misconduct. And once again, another really just vital member of the team. And so those were things that, to some degree, maybe my father had dealt with, but I had not witnessed those in the last years of his career. If anything, it was pretty smooth sailing, which made the job look really easy.
So as a leader, when you have a tragedy occur, and certainly, it's a tragedy. It's a sad situation,
right?
You want to make sure that the family and everybody, feels loved and take care of as best as you can. How do you allow something like that to not impact the business? Because you do have a business to run, and it has a high potential to kind of derail things almost in a way, right? How do you keep things on track? How do you make sure that the agency still runs as a leader through tragedy?
It's a balancing act. Luckily, I've got a really good team, and a team of people that I think understand that as people we care, but the business doesn't. I mean, at the end of the day, the business doesn't care that you got in an argument with your wife, or that you were sick, or so it still has to happen. But I think those 10 years prior to becoming an agency owner certainly taught me that there's a way that you can balance it, and I don't pretend to have totally figured that out yet. Yeah. but I'm certainly better at it today than I was 10 years ago. And so just trying to be there for somebody, but still support them in business as well.
Yeah. I like what you said, where as people we care, but the business doesn't.
Yeah.
And, it's you have to be sensitive to people and their emotions and their feelings and acknowledge them and I don't know if address them is the right word, but you can't be, oh, well, listen, the business still needs to get, so, is that what you mean with that balancing act? Like, I'm going to be here for you and I'm going to support you and acknowledge where we're at, but let's also remember that let's try to balance that a little bit with the job that needs to be done too.
Yeah, I mean, I think regardless of your position, if you're the leader, you've got to make the decisions that are in their best interest, even though they may not totally realize it. Because name a problem that having money problems helps.
Yeah.
There's not many, right?
Yeah.
And so okay, you've experienced this traumatic event, but now production tanks and you're making a lot less money. Your income goes down. Like, that doesn't fix anything. So we've got to try to navigate that. But, and sometimes it means setting up, the agency director that it occurred with. I mean, he's a tough pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of guy. And sometimes it means, setting up a counseling session and telling him he don't have a choice. He's got to go.
Yeah.
And so you've got, once again, ownership in regardless of what the circumstances are. So,
well, as a leader, I think what we find a lot of times in leadership is that it's sometimes, we have a business and we have a model and we have a system and process and we have reports and dashboards to monitor what's happening from a business perspective. But I think the mark of the real leader, that's management, right? That's managing numbers, managing systems. Leading people and being a leader is, in these moments, you're almost their guidance. You're almost their counselor in a way. We kind of joke around. It's like, a lot of this is like you're somebody's therapist when you're the leader, right? But, you got to sit somebody down and say, hey, let's talk about what you're going through and then how we can navigate through there. And I know, especially as an early leader, I remember being a supervisor. You remember we got supervisors in here where people have personal challenges, and it's up to us as leaders to care about them enough to help them through that and still not let it impact their business.
Yeah, you got to carry some of that burden.
Yeah.
And that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot to deal with. And I think for me, early in my career, I figured out that it was just easier to not deal with any of the burdens. Let me just not ask how your children are or how your health is doing.
And how's that work long term?
Not well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, those were the things that once I had to learn, and I think experience is the best teacher in those situations.
Well, it doesn't work well because I feel, and tell me if you agree, that accountability without a relationship is just harassment.
Yeah.
You don't really know who I am. You don't care about anything. And listen, the excuses or the personal problems that I have may not impact the business in a way, but at least you as a leader know enough about me to care, to ask me how I'm doing, to, hey, let's talk about this. And then now, again, you don't have to go all the way across that personal boundary, but you got to acknowledge it. You have to have that relationship.
Right. And you got to care about wanting to get better. I think we've probably all worked with people that were they just were who they were not going to change. And so I at least had the wherewithal to know that I need to make some improvements here and, try to get better at those types of things over the years.
Yeah. So what's next for the Aderholt agency? Where are you seeing the legacy moving on as you've, come out and you've established your agency and who you are? Where do you want to go?
Well, it's pretty cool, right? Because like I said, I think anybody that was around and during my father's career would say that he was a trailblazer of that worksite market. And I'd like to think that maybe one day they would say the same about us in the virtual market. Yeah. Obviously, we've stuck with that model, and we're up 84% this year. And I really feel like as in our third year, we've started to kind of catch our stride. One of the quotes I heard not long after I became an agency owner said, "You'll always overestimate what you can do in the short term and underestimate what you can accomplish in the long term." And that's just really kind of become something that I've just kind of tattooed on myself. I mean, because that's certainly been the case. There's been a lot of frustrations over these last couple years, but I'm seeing us kind of come into our own. And so I want to continue to develop what we've done since 2020 and staying with virtual, and expand the footprint of our agency to other locations. We've got some plans to hopefully make that happen sooner rather than later, and to be able
meeting requests coming up.
Yeah, right. And to be able to give someone the opportunity that I was afforded, and it doesn't, and your last name doesn't have to be Aderholt.
Yeah.
So that's exciting. That's the best part about what we do.
I mean, it's such a great story. Thank you for sharing this. And I want to make sure people kind of take two things away from it: the decision of your dad to get out of that circumstance and change it for the better. And that creates opportunity for you. But your success is your hard work and your decisions that you made, not any relationship or name tied to it. I mean, you put in that work.
Yeah.
So,
and anybody that's in our career can have that same opportunity, because there were advantages to having your father as the agency owner. And so, I've certainly had that same thought about my kids of well, what if they wanted to get into the business, and what does that look like? Yeah. So it's exciting stuff.
All right. Well, great. Well, Drew, thank you so much for being here today and for sharing your journey. We have one last thing. As you know, as a guest on the Level Up Lifestyle podcast, all of our guests receive a bobblehead of themselves. So it is, we had a baseball game last night, and this morning it is Drew Aderholt bobblehead day.
All right.
So I have your official Level Up Lifestyle bobblehead. Right, I haven't seen it either yet, so here we go. And this is Drew Aderholt. There you go.
All right.
All right.
Thanks, man. That's cool.
Pretty good. I think they did a good job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good job. Yeah. Bring that on a plane, get an extra seat. Put it right next to you.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at the bobblehead representation of who you've become through your journey, if you could go back to kind of a crossroads moment, you tell me what that would be. If that's you starting in the business, if it's you at 2020, if it's you at that moment where you're going through some adversity as an agency owner, if you could go back in time with what you know now and give yourself some advice, what would that be?
I would tell myself that it all works out. I think one of the things, I don't know that I ever had that crossroad moment of maybe I should go find something else to do.
Yeah.
But I certainly had a lot of anxiety about where's production coming from this week, and what does the year look like, and where am I going to be 3 years from now? And so I would tell myself that it all works out in the time that it should, and that there's no shortcuts, there's no secret sauce. And when you think that there is, you need to just put blinders on and stay to the course.
It's great advice.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Drew.
All
appreciate you
I
being
appreciate
here,
it, Mike.
All
yeah.
right, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us today. We hope this episode has inspired you on your path to success. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next story. See you soon on the Level Up Lifestyle podcast.